Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Elad Pod. We will get started in just a little bit. We are joined by Michelle and Jonathan from It Starts Today, so we'll be talking about communicating, fundraising, and Missouri especially. So if you haven't been here before, now you'll know the drill. Make sure to go ahead and comment on any of the questions that you might have as the show is going on. You can ask live. If you're watching right now, let us know where you are watching from, so you can go ahead and comment that too. If you are watching on the website or if you're just a little bashful, that's okay. You can also text in your questions. There will be a phone number at the bottom of the screen for much of the show. And while you're watching now, if you could go ahead and share the video so that we can get more folks in on this conversation, learning about what It Starts Today is and asking their questions too. So we'll be on in just a few more seconds, but while you're waiting, go ahead, share the video, and start in writing in your questions, and we'll get to those as soon as we start. All right, talk to you in just a minute. All right, everybody, welcome to the Elad Pod. So we should, hopefully we'll have everybody on. We're having a couple technical difficulties out there today. So if you are watching right now, and if you could, go ahead and comment, let us know you're watching, and let us know this thing is working. Twitter had some issues in the last few weeks, so hopefully they are working now. But it looks like, based on your responses, that we are getting some folks watching, so that's great. My name is Elad Gross. I'm host of the Elad Pod, hence the fun name. Today we are going to be talking with Michelle Hornish and Jonathan Zucker of It Starts Today, Missouri. If you haven't heard of them, well, you're in for a treat today. We're going to talk a lot about communication and fundraising, especially in the political space. So if you do have any questions about that, about where Missouri is going in general, about what you are seeing and ways that you are getting involved, especially locally in politics, let us know. Go ahead and comment, share the video, let more folks see it. During the show, as I mentioned before, you will be able to text your questions in as well. You'll see a phone number at the bottom of the screen for most of the show. Do not call that number. If you call that number, no one's picking up. No one's going to do it. But if you text it, I can see that in the middle of the show. We can get an answer to your question. So go ahead, let us know where you're watching from, what questions you have, and let me make sure we've got all of our guests here and we can all hear them. All right. Michelle and Jonathan, are you here?
I'm here.
That we are.
Okay, great. Wonderful. No, I'm glad it's working out, and glad to have you on the Elad Pod. This is both of your first times on the show.
It is, and we're thrilled
Yeah.
to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited to have you both on, and we're going to talk quite a bit about a whole bunch of stuff, I think, in Missouri, because really the political system and everything that goes around it, what goes into communicating and fundraising about it, it touches on so many different topics. But you all have been doing such wonderful work, especially in some of the races that unfortunately don't get a whole lot of attention in Missouri. And so before we start, I just wanted to say thank you for everything that you've done. And I know you've got a lot of big fans out there for the work that you've done. So if you could you tell us all, and I guess you two will get to pick who gets to introduce the whole thing, but tell us the kind of the work that you're doing and really where it came from, because that's a great origin story, and what you all are doing right now in the state of Missouri and elsewhere too.
Well, I think Jonathan is the one, as the person who actually came up with this idea, who developed it and created it. I think that he's the right one to tell this part of the story. So, Jonathan, I'm going to kick it
You've
to
been
you
drafted.
first.
You're up.
Absolutely. So basically, the origin of It Starts Today is election night 2016 as the origin story for a lot of political activism and organizations is. And I was sitting there. It was about 1 a.m. on election night here on the East Coast. I live in DC, and I was watching my Facebook feed blow up with the Clinton people blaming the Sanders people and the Sanders people blaming the Clinton people. And with my background, and I'll just give you a quick intro on where I come from. I'm a campaign finance attorney. I have a lot of experience as well as a field organizer in progressive organizations. In 2003 to 2005, I was at the DNC in their high dollar fundraising program. And in 2005, I was the third guy involved with Act Blue. I was the first COO and the second CEO or executive director of Act Blue. And so I know a little bit about internet and fundraising and campaign finance. And at about 1 o'clock in the morning, watching this going on, I had the realization that Donald Trump had won the White House and we hadn't taken the Senate and we didn't have the House at that point. And this was really pretty bad. And I started thinking about what we could start doing right now. Hence, It Starts Today as the name of the organization. What we could start doing right now to kneecap Trump as fast as possible. And it all started as a recurring donation program that funded every congressional Democrat running in 2018. And that was the beginning of this. In the fall of 2017, Michelle got involved, and we expanded to Missouri, and we've been doing Missouri state legislative work. For 2020, we did a presidential project. But that's the origin story. It really started at about 1 a.m. on election night 2016. And Michelle, you want to talk about what we've been doing recently?
Well, I mean, we've been doing quite a bit. And since 2017, I've been involved, with our national projects, but also here in Missouri, which, as you know, there's a lot to be done. And you touched on that a little bit, in the introduction, that there are so many races here in Missouri that need funding, that need attention, because we'd be able to get so many wonderful people to run for office if we were able to show them the amount of support that really does exist out there. So for the past few months, we've been spending a lot of time looking at Missouri, looking at all the other states around the country, where there's a similar need, where there are other people who are running for office who are, having to do that on a shoestring budget. And by shoestring, I mean, in 2020, there were 25 House Democrats in Missouri who raised less than $5,000. And that's very difficult to run a race on less than $5,000. I believe there were 8 that had less than $1,000 to run their race. So that really makes it very, very difficult for someone to have a robust get out the vote effort, for them to have a campaign staff. It might be enough for them to, get the word out on Facebook or on social media, but it makes it difficult for them to do a lot of the other things that all of the trainings and all of the advice from people tell you that you need to do. So we at It Starts Today are in a position to empower grassroots people who care about what's going on in Missouri, which is a bit crazy. We empower people to donate $5, $10, $20 a month, so that money can then be split amongst the nominees for Missouri State Legislature to give them that boost, to give them that funding that they need, to get out the vote, to pay the volunteers, or to get the cold pizza and the warm beer, for volunteers that are going and getting out the vote, for those sorts of things.
Right.
So that's really our focus here in Missouri, is trying to build up our subscriber base and the number of people who know about what we're doing. Because I know very well from seeing the reaction to all sorts of the political goings on here in Missouri, people care a lot, and people want to elect more Democrats. We just need to work together to make sure that we're giving the Democrats that are running in these places the resources that they need.
So, well, I've got it on the screen, and it's going to be on many screens. You might have noticed already. It says it starts .today. That's the actual website you can go to, right? You don't need a .com or anything else. It's not that I misspelled it,
No,
right?
No.
no, you got
No,
it right.
of course not.
You
This is
got it
my
right.
show. Why would I just? Yeah, no. So folks can go there right now, and they can see. It's actually great. You got a lot of information there about how the system works. So you've got a lot of folks in Missouri who are running for state representative, for example, state senate, and these are super
Sure.
important positions. For those of you who are following Take Back Missouri right now, there's a link there for you too. But you can see every day on social media, we're putting out all of the things that our legislators are working on, all the bills that they're proposing. It touches on all these kinds of different aspects of life, from utilities to farming to schools and education. I mean, just everything, right? And so these are offices that, unfortunately, a lot of folks don't know who their state representative is or don't know who their state senator is. And so you're talking about, I think a lot of folks, when they hear campaigning and they hear you say $5,000, they're like, what, to like that they gave themselves or something. So it's like that can't be it. But for these races, I mean, the budgets are a little bit, smaller. In some cases, they're very high. But I guess in general, like when you're looking in Missouri, what is that kind of range? What are folks looking at in terms of what they're having to fundraise? And then what are you doing in terms of it starts today that's trying to change that, and why? Like what's the purpose of doing it that way?
So, I mean, Jonathan, did you want to talk about the goals or the?
Why don't I touch on why after you talk about what?
Okay, we can certainly. So when we first started out, we were trying to determine what the goal should be for a state, like a state house district, right? A state representative district, because it's difficult to sort of normalize that across the state. You can imagine that, Jessica Piper, who's running in the first, right? The cost of her raise could be very different than Sarah Unsicker, for example, or Peter Meredith here in the city. So the costs are going to be a little bit different. Since then, we have found that about the first 77 cents per district voter that is spent will increase turnout by 1%. 77 cents per district voter is just about, I think it's $18,000 to $20,000.
Okay.
And that's just about what the goal was that we had decided that we wanted for our state house nominees to get back when we started this in 2017. So about $20,000 is, which was 50 cents per registered voter or 77 cents per eligible voter.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I got some questions. But yeah, Jonathan, explain why.
Well,
like what in the world, right?
So there's actually several reasons for what we do. The most basic one is that we believe that every Democratic voter deserves a professional Democratic candidate for every office. Like, we actually think that is simply good for democracy. It's good for voters. It's important for Democratic voters to see local and state legislative is sort of, I mean, they're far more local than statewide. Local candidates who reflect their values on their ballot, asking for their vote, encouraging them to turn out, because our electoral system is, fundamentally, it's opt-in. You have to choose to vote. And what we as political activists and what the political left, the Democratic Party, being one of the biggest elements of the left, needs to do is it needs as many bites at that apple. It needs to give each registered voter or potential eligible voter, whether they're registered yet or not, as many different reasons to register and vote as possible, which means we want not only a presidential candidate on the ballot, not only gubernatorial and Senate candidates, secretaries of state, attorneys general, all of those at the statewide level, but we also want congressional candidates, and we want state Senate candidates, state House candidates, and then the numerous county and municipal races that also are there. And what we discovered as we dug into this, and this is this goes a little bit to the origin story, I had just an idea. It was hey, here's something we should all agree as people on the political left is valuable. Let's fund all the Democrats running for office. Mm-hmm. And we can do it and the power of recurring donations means if we start now, $10 a month, and enough of us get involved, we can move really serious money. And that was the idea. But then we started getting asked, well, why are you doing this? Why is this important? And we started looking at the reality. And what we discovered was just shocking and or depressing, which is that the Democratic Party, and it's not that there's some, mystical, cabal of 5 people who made this decision. It's individually thousands or tens of thousands of people collectively reaching the same conclusion. But the Democratic Party has given up on about 45% of the country. We're not running candidates. Where we are running candidates, they're woefully underfunded, $1,000 to $5,000 for a state ledge campaign. You can't professionalize at that level. You might be able to do a little bit of outreach. You might be able to buy a little bit of beer. You might be able to, beer and pizza. You might be able to, buy a photocopier or a laser printer, pay for gas for you to drive around your very large rural district, but you're not running a real professional campaign. So that's the first thing. And the second is a practical, mechanical, political calculus, which is that as Democrats, we've gotten very good at top-down turn out the vote operations. We'll put ballot initiatives on the ballot that encourage progressives to turn out and vote. We will run and fund statewide candidates. But what we've forgotten is that top-down, works hand in hand with bottom-up. And that there are voters who are not going to be motivated by statewide candidates. There are going to be voters who are not going to be excited by whoever the Democratic Party nominates for president in a given cycle. But they could get excited about, the owner of the local hardware store who's a Democrat who wants their vote for state legislature. And the neat thing that we've discovered as we've dug into this problem over the last, 4 years is that the numbers back us up. There is a reverse coattails effect. Like, we understand the president has coattails. How many members of Congress and Senate, state senators and governors did the president help get elect? We talk about that all the time. But the reverse is also true. How many gubernatorial candidates got elected because 100 state legislative candidates each turned out an extra 300, 400, 500 votes and got them over the top? Right. And, academics and now some political organizations have started looking at that problem. And the reality is the difference between not having a Democrat on the ballot at all and having a funded challenger, even in the deepest red district where that funded challenger is really unlikely to win, that can be in that district. The difference can be 2.5 percentage points on turnout for the top of the ticket that the candidate for governor or senator or president did no work to get and just benefits from. And that's the second thing, is a state like Missouri, if we're going to turn it back to blue, and I grew up in Missouri, and when I was a kid, it was a blue state. Danforth was the exception as a Republican senator. Like, he was the exception to the rule. And if we're going to turn it blue again, we're going to turn it blue by first winning statewide, and then by breaking the the state legislative, supermajority and the majority, and start winning, in the county races throughout the state. Yeah. But we can accelerate that statewide flip by funding our state legislative candidates. And the last thing, because I've been talking too long, is there's also a profound value to election after election after election having a candidate on the ballot. Having someone who is recruiting volunteers, training precinct captains, working on getting out the vote, working on registering new voters, all of that kind of electoral infrastructure, you build it. And if you maintain it, you can grow and grow and grow. And you just build one level, and then you build the next level and the next level. But if you leave it alone for 2, 3, 4 years, it's like a sandcastle. It just washes away. Mm-hmm. And there are parts of Missouri that have barely had a state legislative candidate in the last decade and a half. Yeah. And those places, we just need to invest in them. We might not win those elections anytime soon, but if we're going to win them in 10 or 15 years, we better start investing in them now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm a very big fan, in case folks can't tell because of how big I put your website on the screen. I'm a very big fan of It Starts Today, and something that I did when I was running was travel all over the state, a whole lot. I still need to catch up on sleep from that, but all over the place. And someone who I would see a lot was Michelle and other folks from It Starts Today who were just running around, and they were
Yeah.
tabling and telling folks about it. And that process is so important because you are going to places that folks have not been going for a very long time. There isn't much of a presence there, so there's a lot of practical problems with that affects everybody up and down the ticket, from folks who are running for county council, even school board, to folks who are running for president of the United States. It's that the information that we have about voters in the area is very bad. And so you're sending, you think you're calling Ms. Jones at this address, and instead you're calling Mr. Smith, and Mr. Smith is not very happy to talk to you right now, and you thought you were going to get a great volunteer based on the information that you had. And so, having just like that information update is just such a big deal. It's really interesting, Michelle, when you were talking about, it's like, because you were like, based on outreach, the 77 cents per was it registered voter? Is that what it is?
Well, there's two different metrics. There's a bunch of
Okay.
different metrics, and I'm getting too wonky probably for our
No,
purposes
I love
here,
it. This is
right?
great. This is wonderful.
This is how we roll. We talk about numbers and data
Uh-huh.
and statistics and the amount of this and whatever. But what it comes down to is about 50 cents per registered voter in that district. I mean, it's about $20,000 essentially for a state representative district. I mean, that was our goal when we started out, just because we wanted to, look at it as, what would you need to have if you were just in a typical district? What would you need the bare minimum to run a professional campaign, so that you would be able to maybe hire a part-time staffer, or get a mail piece out or 2 mail pieces out. I mean, mail is really expensive. I think that people who haven't worked on a campaign, or don't have friends who have run or haven't run themselves, don't recognize these are significant expenditures. When people are sending out those campaign mailers, I mean, this from your own race, it is not cheap. So every little bit really does count. So. And I think that, to your point of traveling all over the state, I mean, it's been really important to us as It Starts Today for people to feel seen and heard. I think that for far too long, there are entire areas across the state where people haven't felt seen. They haven't felt as though, what they believe in and what they stand for has really been reflected or listened to. And that's something that we wanted to make sure that people saw, that we want It Starts Today to be reflective of the entire community that it is. We have thousands of people who are all joining together to support Democrats from across the state, and that's a pretty beautiful thing. We didn't want this just to be an urban thing. We wanted this to be a Missouri thing. And so I'm proud that that's what we've been able to accomplish. I should share with you after we get off, I'll share with you the map that I created of that has dots that represent all the people who are members of our community of donors. And it's inspiring to me. I look at it every now and again just for a little bit of an extra inspiration. I think that's an important thing for all of us to remember.
Yeah, I remember those days. We used to have a competition. It's like, hey, nobody in this county's given to us yet, and then people would just be, oh, I got a friend, I could go, I'll hit him up. Yeah, that is great. I mean, what's really cool is because, I mean, you are building a community around this, right? Yeah. And I think, especially for folks who are, into and know about It Starts Today, they talk about it a lot, like all the time. And so from a practical standpoint, just to be clear for folks who might be a little bit less familiar, when you donate to It Starts Today, you are taking that donation and then you are divvying it up amongst all of these folks who are running all over the state. Is that how that works in general?
Well, so what we're doing is we take the donations that come in, we hold them until after the primary, because this relates specifically to nominees, right? So I want people to be aware that these are funds for nominees, not for candidates. That's why we're so specific about the language that we use. So we hold them until after the primary, and then we distribute them. So those funds will actually go to the nominees after, whatever primary they've had, which oftentimes, especially in a place like Missouri, where we really have a late primary, we have a primary that happens in August. Right. So that doesn't give nominees that much time to raise the funding that they need for the general. So that's one really big benefit of the amount of funding that we're able to give nominees after that primary. But yes, then it goes to both House and Senate nominees. The Senate nominees get 5 times the amount that the House nominees get. And that's not because we like them 5 times as much. It is because they have a district that is 5 times the size. And so that is only fair.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's interesting. You know, so here, like, for a lot of, and I've met with a lot of candidates who are in that boat where, you know, they had $1,000, and, you know, it's like to Jonathan, to what you were saying, you know, that's just such a great visual. It's like a sandcastle that keeps getting washed away, and you have so many folks, right, who they'll run, and maybe they were just like a name on a ballot or something, and then they're gone, right? That name isn't coming back. They were just doing somebody a favor, and they went and they put it out there. But it's kind of, I mean, really, it needs to get to one. I think it needs to get to the point where we're looking at it long term, and we're saying, okay, I'm doing this now, realizing I might be doing this next time and the time after that too. But two is you know, I really feel strongly that the way, because in Missouri, there's not much balance, and I think that whatever party you're in, I think that's, and Michelle, you and I have talked about this a lot, when there's not balance in our government between the two parties, and one party thinks it can do whatever it wants, we have problems. And that's exactly why Jack Danforth at the time, who was a Republican, was elected in a heavily Democratic state, because he was pointing out, hey, there are problems here, and people knew that there were, because there was a lot of corruption and all these other things that were happening, and he pointed that out. It's just, you know, I feel like from in Missouri, with how nationalized issues have been, it seems like the solutions are going to come from those local folks who are running. The person that you know who's run the hardware store or the bar, or who's a teacher in your community, because those are the ones who will be able to connect with you first. Are you I guess from, you know, in terms of the folks that you are working with since you've started and you've seen all of these kinds of things, have you seen like any of that kind of work happening around the state? And if yes, if no, like what have you seen that has been successful? And what do you think that we are still missing in Missouri to help us, you know, get started, like get towards this goal where we have folks who, you know, really feel supported, they feel like they're able to go out there and get their message across, and even if that day didn't work out for them, they want to come back and do it again. Have you seen like some of these things that we can take lessons from in this work?
So, I mean, was that to me or Jonathan?
Well, you know what? You're both
Okay.
on the show. I haven't muted any of you yet. Haven't had to. I can. So, but
No,
yeah,
I
I
mean-
mean, both of you.
Why don't you start? I have a few thoughts, but please go ahead.
So I think that, you know, here in Missouri, we have a lot of organizations that are doing great work with training, with recruiting, with supporting candidates in that regard, right? So we've got, you know, the what used to be the House Victory Committee. They're doing great work. I know that the Democratic Party has been providing some training, and I know that they're going to be, you know, providing additional support to candidates for sure. I think, though, that in order for people who are going to be running in these red districts to really feel supported by the broader community, which I think that they need. I think they need that from all of us Democrats to be joining together and supporting them. I think it's a lot easier for them to feel supported if they have the funding that backs them up, so that they aren't having to learn how to be a good candidate, do all of the things that they need to do to get out the vote, and spend so much of their time trying to raise the funds that they need to do the other two things, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to recruit a candidate, for example, even in an incredibly red district, if you go to them and say, if you sign on the dotted line and if you agree to run in this district, which we recognize is going to be very difficult, we'll give you $15,000. It starts today. This community of people is going to make sure that you have at least $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 to be able to run this race. And then we can treat the people who are running in these districts like really what they are, which is supercharged organizers. These are people who know their neighbors, who know their community, there people up in Livingston County know Livingston County, and that is how they were able, to beat back CAFOs, right?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't people from another part of the state coming in and telling someone else what to do. It was people within that community feeling empowered to do what they needed to be done.
Right.
And we get that to happen easier, I think, if we show folks, listen, we're not going to tell you what to do. We're not going to tell you how to do it. We're going to give you the resources that you need to do what you need to do what you know needs to be done. I've talked too much, Jonathan. I should let you speak for a while.
Well, no, you hit on a couple of the things. Yeah. You hit on a couple of the specific things I was going to mention. We talk about this a lot, and we've done this a lot, so it's not surprising we're taking words out of each other's mouth. But I'm going to take sort of a bit of a step back from the sort of the specifics that Michelle was talking about, and just acknowledge the fact that one of the aspects of, there's the old adage, I don't belong to the political party, I'm a Democrat, which actually has some truth to it. I mean, there are truths in those kinds of quips, which is that the Democratic Party doesn't have anyone, and for reasons of campaign finance structure and legal structures, almost can't have anyone whose real job is to think about 10, 15, 20 years down the line. We would love that to be the job of the state party and the state party chair. But the way that state parties, and this is not unique to Missouri, I'm not trying to pick on Missouri, this is pretty much the case with every single state party, but the way they're structured really doesn't encourage that kind of long-term thinking. It's a highly political position. They tend to turn over every 2 or 4 years. And that makes it very difficult for any one person to think about the long term. Yeah. It's as true as a current state party chair as it was for Howard Dean when he came into the DNC with a 50 state strategy and discovered that he had no money. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to implement that, as opposed to, actually, in contrast, Jamie Harrison, the current DNC chair, actually started the year with almost $45 million in the bank, and is already investing 20 million of that right now in organizing in not every state, but they're giving money to every state, but really heavily organizing in the states that are going to be key for the 2022 congressional elections and the 2024 presidency. And that's how you'd like to be able to do it. But when I worked at the DNC started that cycle $16 million in debt, not $40 million in the black. And that's one of the things that we see with the Democratic Party in particular. The Republicans are a little bit better about this, but they're not absolutely better at it. And that's just a lack of long-term strategic thinking. And the only way I know to solve that problem is to throw money at it, but in a really constructive cycle after cycle, secure funding kind of way. Not just here's $50 million, go solve the problem, but if we can build a funding base, Democrats are actually quite good and incredibly competitive with Republicans, even in a state as currently red as Missouri is. We're really good at funding our incumbents. We're really good at funding the swing districts that we think we have a chance to win. We're pretty darn good at funding our statewide candidates and our statewide initiatives. But what we leave out is that first tier of funding, that first whatever metric you use, but that first $15,000 to $20,000 in a state house district, more like $100,000 in a state senate district, or $80,000 to $100,000 in a state senate district, that just lets you run that professional campaign and is all still on the upward curve before you get to the point of diminishing returns in terms of voter turnout. We don't fund everything to the point of diminishing returns. And the reality of campaign finance law is the party can't. Even if the party had all the money it wanted to do, it couldn't just hand $20,000 to every state house race and $80,000 to each Senate race. They can't do it. Campaign finance law won't let them. And that's been one of the problems, or one of the sort of structural problems that the It Starts Today model solves, which is, and this is what I've been spending a lot of time thinking about for the last 15 years, is how do you apply technology and campaign finance law? How do you find the intersection of those two things to solve problems that can't be solved just by going to a billionaire? Because, even if we had the billionaires who would want to do it, you can't do it. And that's the beauty of the, thousands of people coming together, giving $5, $10, $25 a month that gets spread out among, we don't need to get into too much in the weeds, spread out among a couple of different PACs that then make donations to the candidates. And that allows you to fund the candidates without breaking any campaign finance laws, but it also brings to bear the power of recurring donations. Someone who can afford $5 a month over a 24-month period has just given away $120 to candidates, right. And they might not ever have $100 sitting around that they could just give to a candidate. Right. And that's where the power of recurring donations comes in. And that's one of the things that we've really figured out with what we're doing is how can you give people the ability to make recurring donations for a full cycle and still have the money go to candidates, most of whom didn't even know they were running for 8 or 10 months of that 24-month period, and then spent the next few months trying to figure out what they were doing. And then the last thing I wanted to just talk about is to reinforce that point that Michelle made about what it would mean to free candidates, particularly in the less competitive races, from having to fundraise. I mean, you know what it's like to be a candidate. You were running statewide, which by default is much more competitive than a lot of these state legislative districts are. And you spent how many hours a week? I mean, you might actually know. How many hours a week did you spend fundraising? And every hour and without actually having to answer that question, every hour you spent fundraising was an hour you were not spending talking to voters. And when you're talking about someone who's running in a Missouri House district with 30,000 voters, if we could save them a few hundred hours over the course of the cycle from, you don't have to fundraise this money, it's just going to be given to you. And instead you can spend those 200 hours, knocking on an extra 3,000 doors, 4,000 doors. That makes a big, big difference in terms of voter turnout. And that's, on the one hand, we as Democrats like to talk about public financing for elections. And that is absolutely, I agree 100% with the policy positions behind it. And that is one of the reasons why I like it so much. But in the absence of an ability to convince a state or federal legislature to adopt it and spend taxpayer dollars on it, what we've basically built here is for Democrats only, because, well, those are the candidates we care about. We're on the political left. For Democrats only, it's privately funded public financing. And it's really powerful.
Yeah. It's, I think it does, even in addition to that, I think it does something else that's really important. And this is especially true for folks who are in, districts where the odds are against them and where maybe they're a first-time candidate. It's that, one, if you're first time, you might not have a ton of experience fundraising like you have to do as a candidate. And so not really know. It's like, oh, goodness, like, what am I going to do? Hopefully I'll just get on Twitter and I'll go viral. Everybody wants to go viral. And then that will take care of all my problems. That's how everybody else does it, right? And maybe not knowing, one, like, oh, here's one, how to make an ask. And there's like, well, I mean, just ask people for money. But two, it's like, who do I call? And how often do I call? And what happens when they hang up? And am I supposed to call again? And so this person thinks this. And some people have that knowledge, but that's not really spread out to all of these folks who are running for the first time. So that's like a big relief just from the beginning. It's saying, oh, there's support already out there for you to hit the ground running, and then hopefully hire a campaign manager or get somebody to coach you up a little bit. But then those resources are there for you to go about it. But two, I think, and this is maybe more for, well, I think this is both categories. This is for those who are new, but also those who have done it before, is that seeing this support in an area that doesn't get much support all of a sudden gives you a whole lot more hope than you had when you started.
Yeah.
And attitude, I've talked about this a few times, but I've been on really successful football teams and very bad ones, very, very bad ones. Where everybody has to get cut and new coaches have to come in and all this stuff has to change because the attitude around it has to change before anything else can. If you don't believe in yourself or you don't have some external, support telling you, hey, have some confidence and go about doing it, it is very difficult. And I think something that I've heard a lot from folks who have received support from It Starts Today specifically was how much that meant to them because they didn't know where they would start. So I think for me, when I hear It Starts Today, I know, from the origin story, it meant one thing. For a lot of folks, I think it's like, oh, like I'm going to run, and it starts like right now. Like for me, this is the support that gets me started. And so I don't know, I just feel I have a lot of warm and fuzzy feelings about it because it is very focused on letting normal, regular people get involved in their government by support, one, by running and knowing that support's going to be there, but two, by supporting folks who are out there too. And so it's just really, it's really great to see. Do you, and what do you need? Like at this point, right, obviously you need more folks to be involved. What are we talking about in Missouri for essentially this private, publicly funded system to work? What kind of numbers are we looking at for the state that you think would then, get folks up to that level where, here's your start off money and go get them?
Actually, I've been crunching a lot of numbers in the last few weeks.
I love numbers.
And I can tell you exactly what we were looking for.
Okay.
At a certain point in time, we realized one thing about our existing model that might not have been we made some choices along the way, and one of the choices we made was to fund every candidate, and to split the money evenly across all candidates. And one of the things that we've been rethinking, though we have not reached a final conclusion on this, we're actually talking to our community about it. But one of the things that we're thinking is that instead of taking that approach, what we really should take is, because of the gap that we've really identified, it should start by getting everyone to this minimum viable level. And if we have money left over after that, then we'll split it among everyone. But that minimum viable level, we for this we actually use a metric that we haven't talked about yet. But comes out of a study that an LSU professor did looking at about 20 states back in 2013, where he discovered that challengers and funding and spending by challengers actually influences voter turnout more than spending by incumbents. And actually, the first 36 cents per eligible voter that a challenger spends actually turns out 1%, increases turnout in that race by 1%. Whereas just on average overall, it's that 77-cent number that Michelle was talking about.
Yeah.
So we've been looking at funding, at focusing our funding specifically in non-incumbent Democratic races. So either Republican seats that have a Democratic challenger or have not had a Democratic challenger or the like. And that number comes out to about 17,000 and change in Missouri House race. Oh, sorry. No, I'm looking at the wrong one. That comes out to about 10,000 and change in Missouri House race and just under $50,000 in a Senate race, just based on the size of the districts. Mm-hmm. And what that turns into, if we're trying to get every state House race to 10 grand and every state Senate race to 50 grand, it's a little bit different than what our goals have been in the past. But if we just look at how Democrats did in 2020 in Missouri, and then just sort of say, what would we need to do to, get a candidate in all the places that we didn't have someone, those would be fund fully, fund everyone who did raise some money, get them up to $10,000 first. We end up with, sorry, I'm just scrolling through a spreadsheet.
You've got it on the screen, right?
Yeah. I've got it on the screen in front of me.
Fresh off the press, folks. Yeah.
We end up wanting to distribute just over $1 million, under $1.1 million, so $1,089,000 is sort of the real gap we've identified in Missouri, which would allow every single House race at 10 grand, every single Senate race at about 50 grand. To get to that number, we need 4,500 people giving $10 a month. That's
it.
On the one hand, that's all you need. On the other hand, you need 4,500 people. And that's actually doable. It requires funding. It requires, money to advertise, and to market and things like that. But it doesn't require millions of dollars. It requires hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's really heartening. And we've been working at that. We've been chipping away at that goal, cycle after cycle. But that's the fully realized what would Missouri need. And just to put a number on it, that would actually increase the statewide vote total by something just under 40,000 votes.
Wow.
Is that enough to win a statewide election right now in Missouri? It hasn't been true for any of our statewide candidates who've lost for the last couple of cycles. But in 6 or 8 years, as the generations shift, as all those other things as you pick away at this, we're going to get to a place where 40,000 votes is going to matter. I mean, 40,000 votes was half of what Trump lost by nationwide. We're in close states, you're going to first flip them and you're going to win a Senate race or a gubernatorial race by 10 or 20 or 30,000 votes. And this is going to be that margin. And it's going to be the thing that means you win it 2 or 4 years sooner than you would otherwise.
Man, that number is that's great. I would thought it was going to be a lot worse than that. That's a really doable thing.
It's totally doable. If everyone who is watching this podcast right now decided to go to itstarts.today, go to our Missouri project and chip in $5, we'd be well on our way to that goal.
Yeah, we get like 1 million viewers all the time. Just everybody do it. They'll be way over. Go ahead, people.
I mean, the thing too that I just wanted to emphasize again is that this isn't just a one-time investment either. I mean, we're talking about a community of people that isn't going away. Right. We've been around now for a few cycles, so hopefully people can see that we're not leaving anytime soon. We're pretty persistent people. And so is our community, and the investment that we're making in these districts will continue cycle after cycle. So rather than seeing a lack of investment and a hollowing out in a lot of places across the state, which I think people recognize, we're talking about the people, the grassroots, being the ones that invest in those areas that we know need it the most, and giving those areas the ability, the tools, the resources that they need to build themselves back up, which I think is pretty darn powerful.
That's great. Yeah, so they can go right now. They can go to itstarts.today, right? Yeah.
Yes.
And make a donation.
Please do.
Michelle, I saw that you, everybody else didn't get to see it, but I get to see the behind the scenes stuff. But I saw that you had a cat who tried to visit. And mine is trying to say hi now. Yeah.
Yes, during most of our conversation, I've had a cat named Vinny on my lap.
Vinny?
So if it seemed as though I was distracted, that might have been why.
Oh, goodness. Well, yeah, I heard that, before there, we did it. I knew before the show you mentioned that you might have some cats or even some children who might intervene, so I actually left the door open on purpose today to make you feel better in case it happens.
Oh, thank you.
I knew this one would come and say hi. She loves my Chillicothe cup so much.
Oh, that's so great. Yeah, see, now I wish that Vinny would have he's gone now. Of course,
I
when you want
I
to
blew
go
it.
around, they're
I
nowhere.
blew it.
But...
I should have switched the camera when I saw it. I didn't do it. We got a couple questions in.
Great.
None of them are about my cat yet, but I'm sure they're coming in soon. All right, Amy, actually, well, great. We actually answered one of your questions just a moment ago, but we'll get to the other one. But one of the questions that was related to the material we just talked about, and I'll put this on the screen, was how much money needed you think approximately for state senate? And you were talking about, the focus on having a challenger because the spending is, a bit more cost effective in those situations you found for turnout.
Sure.
Some of these races for state senate are insane. Like they are tons of money. So really it depends on where you are, how, I guess, competitive the district is between Republicans and Democrats. We did see some that, we've seen millions of dollars spent and not too far in the past, and even this time too. And then actually, like in cycles just afterwards, that there wasn't as much money spent in those same districts. I'm thinking about Senator Doug Beck's district that used to be Scott Sifton's, where a whole lot of money was, and maybe that's just based on who is choosing to pop up and run at any given time, or what the world is
Sure.
thinking, or how much the Cardinals are charging for commercials before their games. I remember that one came out. But yeah, it can really vary quite a bit. But even having like this kind of money starting them off is definitely a really big deal, just to get that initial infrastructure there for campaigns. But yeah, some of these can be super expensive.
So I think, we generally, for a Senate race, what we view as sort of that first baseline funding is about $50,000, 48 and change, to specifically answer Amy's question. But the bigger point that you're making is there's a difference between what we consider baseline funding, which has the biggest bang for your buck, in terms of if you're spending money on a campaign, at the end of the day, your goal is to turn out voters. Yes, you want to win elections, but the way you win elections is by having people come out and vote for you. Mm-hmm. And that first $50,000 in a state Senate race is actually going to get you the most votes per dollar spent on it as a campaign, which does not mean that there's not value to spending $1 million in a hotly contested, swing district where that extra $950,000 gets you enough extra votes to get you the win. But those are two different calculuses. And as Democrats, we're actually really good at funding those swing districts. We're pretty darn good at identifying them in advance. The state parties, the national party, at the state legislative level, the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, they're really good at crunching those numbers and predicting what districts are really going to be in play. They're never going to be perfect. And if they're not failing on a whole bunch of the ones they try, then they're certainly not trying hard enough. If they're succeeding everywhere, they're not trying hard enough. But at the same time, those are not the races that we're really concerned about. We're concerned about the ones that don't get the attention from the state or national party committees, the ones where the candidates get recruited and then abandoned. And in some places, we don't even successfully recruit a candidate at all, because those are the places that we need to work on long term. John Ossoff is now a United States Senator, and he rose to fame by running in a special election in the Georgia 6th in 2017. And it was sort of the only thing going on. Right. It was, he's telegenic. He's great. He raised $35 million in an 8-week period for the special election. And we were going to win this darn thing because Trump had just gotten elected and we were just going to do something. And everyone just threw their money at John Ossoff's campaign. Well, he lost. But the thing that most people don't know about this district, and it's Newt Gingrich's old district, is that from the time that Newt Gingrich won it 40 years ago, Democrats had only spent like $16 million combined over the course of 40 years. And most of that was in 2 elections. 9 of that 16 was in 2 elections. And then all of a sudden, John Ossoff comes along and we throw $30 million in it. We try to win that election. He falls just short. But because, to use my sandcastle analogy, he was building on nothing. He was building on wet, muddy sand, and he was trying to build something and he just couldn't quite get it together. But the foundation he built that then, and I've completely forgotten the name of the candidate who came along and won it in 2018. The foundation he built, Lucy McBath. The foundation he built, she got to stand on his shoulders, and she went on to win that in the next election. And that's the nature of electoral infrastructure. You build on it cycle after cycle after cycle. And if Ossoff had been running in a district where we had spent, let's say, $500,000 in 20 losing campaigns, but we'd spent, $10 million more, but we'd done it every cycle, not, 4 or 6 million in a couple of, and then nothing for years. If we'd just been doing that every single cycle, wouldn't have changed who won the election in those 20 elections, but I am quite sure that it would have been enough to get John Ossoff the extra point and a half he needed, or whatever exactly it was, I'm forgetting now, to win that special election. And that's what we need to be doing in Missouri. We need to be funding these races, even if we're not going to win them.
Right.
We need to stop seeing the primary qualification for a candidate. Can you fundraise? Can you hit your fundraising goal? That is the first question that party committees ask of people who are like, I think I'm going to run for office. And they're like, well, if you're running for Congress, come back and talk to us after you've raised $250,000. And if you've done it, then maybe we'll talk. And if you can't, and don't get me wrong, there are overlaps between the skills to raise money and to go get people to, and to inspire people to vote for you, but they're not the same thing. Being able to raise money is as much about who you know as it is how well you can communicate. And if you just don't know people who can write $1,000 checks, you're really limited in your fundraising. You might not even know 1,000 people who can write you 50 checks, or 50 people who can write you $100. Like, you might not know those people, but you might be an credible communicator. And that's the, that's what we're looking for and what we're doing, is decoupling fundraising prowess from your quality and qualifications as a candidate, because we just want people who are really good at communicating progressive values in whatever the local vernacular is. And we just want to see those people running everywhere.
Yeah. We got a couple more. We've got a few more minutes. We can do this. Oh, Amy's got to go. I'm going to come back to yours, Amy, because we're almost off topic on that one, but we'll get to it. It's on. Okay, we got a question from Tim here.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Tim. Do you have a model for best ways to use money? Like ads in newspapers versus radio versus social media versus mailers, all of that. Has there been some? I mean, it's definitely going to have to be specific to wherever you're running or what you're running for. But are there kind of models out there right now that's like, hey, this is way more effective than this stuff?
So, I mean, we haven't created or we haven't promoted a particular model that, directs people or encourages people to use their money in a certain way. There are a lot of different organizations. The National Democratic Training Committee has a number of different trainings that you can take on that. I know that the HDCC, what used to be the House Victory Committee, I know that they have a lot of training and advice that they can give to candidates. So there's a lot of information out there about, best practices on how folks can spend money. In the future, as we grow, it would be wonderful for us to have some relationships with some of those organizations where we can, help candidates and, connect them with some of these organizations that are providing those trainings. But those trainings definitely exist. Yeah. But it's no strings attached from our perspective. We're not directing that folks do any particular thing.
Right. So that's just under their control. They get the money, and then they have to go figure, which makes sense because I mean, in some, we took out ads in different kind of venues and media and all of that.
Exactly.
We did some rural radio. And some of that was even, thinking about, long-term relationships, like, oh, all of a sudden this is going to be the first Democratic candidate they get money from ever. And then hopefully they'll think, oh, I'm going to go and ask the next one who comes along. So we were thinking kind of long term on a lot of what we were doing too. And we were working with a lot of state rep candidates, so it's not dissimilar from kind of the mindset that you all were in. But yeah, I would say from most cost, I mean, like in terms of like where you can start, the social media stuff now is a little bit easier, especially on Facebook. There are a lot of folks there. Your state or your area might be different, but in rural Missouri, Facebook is a good way to get folks, and it's a lot cheaper than mailers. It's cheaper than some of these other things. Radio's not too bad. TV's a lot of money. But yeah, I mean, just starting, and you think about kind of, the snowball effect where you're starting with something, and then you're always thinking, how am I growing that to something else? Right. Which I think then brings us to, in part, with Amy's question too. So see, I told you, Amy, I was going to get to this one. For any good ideas in organizing small fundraising events. And for you all, I know, you're obviously fundraising for, it starts today, and this can apply, nonprofit space, wherever else it is too. But I guess thoughts about kind of when you all are thinking about fundraising for this, or even saying, if you are talking to a candidate, if you were to provide some kind of pointers, but in general, what kind of ideas have you all used for fundraising for this in particular that you think could be helpful?
Well, I mean, I think it sort of depends on if we're talking about COVID times or if we're talking about regular times,
Right.
right? I mean, this is such a unique it's a unique moment in history, so it is particularly difficult, I think. And I'm recognizing what I think might be sort of behind the question, right? It's a unique moment. It's a very difficult time, I think, for folks to get together and to have small events where you're fundraising. I have seen some really excellent, Zoom calls where people have, great conversations. We're actually, potentially going to be doing something like that with It Starts Today to talk more about a study that we commissioned and that, we'd love to share with people. So having small Zoom events where people can join in. I've seen some really fun um, trivia
Hmm.
here in St. Louis. Trivia is a big deal. And so people get together and they do like a trivia event, and it's, $25 or $10 or something like that. And those have been really fun. Those are smaller dollar events, but they're also community building. And I think that, part of having some of these fundraising events and part of bringing your, community of supporters together is making that a community of supporters. And so it could be that, this period in time is a good moment to build that up more than what we have really been able to in the past. Jonathan,
Yeah.
did you have any other ideas of small fundraising events that you've seen?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts of and not really specific to COVID times. The important thing to remember when you're doing any kind of fundraising is that fundraising is about community, and successful fundraising, bluntly, is about asking people who don't want to say no to you,
Right.
whatever you're asking them for. And there's a couple of different ways to do that, but one of the best ways to do it is to build community before you do the fundraising.
Hmm.
So, for example, one of the most successful fundraisers for the DNC that I've ever known was a guy named Andy Tobias, and he was the treasurer of the DNC for like 20 years. And what he would love to do is he would say to someone, "Look, you get me a room full of people who are capable of writing a check the size I'm looking for." Now he was doing national party fundraising, so it was like $5,000, but it's also true of $50 or $5 or $10. You fill a room with some people who are capable of doing that, and I'll show up and I'll ask them for the money. And that is an incredibly effective first bite at the apple. Is ask people to come and just hear a pitch. Ticketed events is always the instinct. Like, if we collect the money up front, we've got the money, but that doesn't always raise you as much money, particularly if you're thinking over the medium to longer term, as just getting the people in the room, get them enjoying each other, get them feeling bought in and as part of this community, and then you can go back and ask them again for money. And this was something that the Obama campaign really figured out. Now, they did it out of necessity. They knew they were never going to be able to compete with Hillary Clinton's major donors. So what they did is they set out to build a community who would give them $50 or $100 every time they asked. And the beauty of the internet and fundraising platforms like ActBlue and the like is that they make $5 donations as efficient as $50 donations in terms of the cost structure. And that means that really, if you can build a community who can give you $5 3 or 4 times a year, that might actually be easier than going out and finding, a quarter of that number of $25 donors. And you can just add zeros. I mean, all of this stuff, scales. But if you're just thinking about it, it's really about building community, and it's about identifying, if you are the fundraiser, people who just aren't going to want to say no to whoever asks them, and then figure out who that person should be. And it might not be you. It might be a friend of a friend, and you might need that intermediary friend to make the ask. But those are the big things.
Yeah, it's so it's such a good, I mean, it's such a good point. And my wife, who's a professional fundraiser, would say, and then once you have them in the room, you pressure them.
Yes,
Yeah, peer pressure. You always have somebody in there who's ready to go, and then everybody's just kind of looking around. It's kind of, yeah. I've been to
exactly.
several events that she's done for nonprofits, and it's always a fun time. Alcohol is usually available there too in person, so that's a thing. We've done, some. I mean, we were very focused on small dollar donors. So, I would, you asked me, how much time I spent fundraising. I would actually, so I drove a lot, and I would have, I can't believe I'm one of those people now with one of those headsets. And so you need a little microphone. But I would have to do that because my car's windows are bad. You'd hear the wind coming through and everything else. So otherwise, you just wouldn't hear me. But I would call folks, and oftentimes I would call them off of different kind of lists, what folks were interested in, people who might have signed up for some policy initiative that we were pushing forward, and just say, hi, my name's Elad, I'm running for Attorney General, and I wanted to hear what your thoughts are for Missouri. And that was like that initial, I want you to be part of this community, and I want to hear what your ideas are,
Right.
before asking for anything, right? Other than your ideas, and I want you to participate, which is to me a pretty big deal. And a lot of folks were, oh goodness, this is great. I've never had a candidate call me like this before. But then folks, I think you create, what you're doing it for the right reason. You're communicating that. You're having people buy into that vision with you, and then you tell them, here's how we can make that vision happen. And I think if we see fundraising more, just like less of this like robotic, this is the money you have to get, go get this, don't come talk to me until you have it, but more of
Right.
like a tool for us to get to that end goal. It's a much healthier thing, and it feels not bad. It doesn't feel like you're trying to squeeze your friends out of money. You're trying to get them to be a part of it with you, and I think that applies to big, small, whatever kind of fundraising events you're doing. But if you do have more questions about that and need help doing something, especially in Missouri, go to takebackmo.org, and we've got folks who volunteer to come out and help you do it. So at least give you advice so that you can take that back. And if you're running for office, then encourage all your friends to donate to It Starts Today. And that way, once you are the nominee,
Yes.
then you will be able to get a whole bunch of support right off the bat. So great. Well, I wanted to give you, I know we've been here for a little bit, but I'm going to look at this. See, look, I can make it bigger, I can make it smaller, but that's where you want to go, okay, to support them.
I love it.
It's great work that you all are doing. It's absolutely fantastic. I'll have to have you guys come back on if you all are interested. But
we'd love to.
Would love to.
and hey, and to Amy's point, we can do a small little fundraising event or a big one, depending on how many people sign on.
Right.
But
Let's
yeah,
do
I
it.
think it's great, and then highlighting folks who have really received a lot of the support from you, and who I know they talk about it all the time. They're super
Yeah.
appreciative, and then those who are coming forward, I think could be really cool. So
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. I mean, I would love
Yeah.
to share some of the thank you notes that I've gotten from people, which are pretty fantastic, especially folks in
Yeah.
red districts that are just so appreciative of, the money that comes. It's not from It Starts Today, which is what
Right.
I try to tell people. It's not really from me. It's from all the people who are part of our community. This is actually, I'm just the messenger.
Mhm.
They're the ones who are bringing this to you. So
Right. Well, thank you both. Thank you both for all the work that you've done. This is really wonderful.
thank
I'm very
you.
happy we could have you finally
Thank
on
you for having
here.
us.
And for everybody else, so there's not going to be a show on Saturday. That's the deal, because we had it right now. And we'll be getting all of this stuff out on podcasts everywhere else. Subscribe wherever you are. Hope this was helpful. But we will have another show next week. Get excited for that one. And until then, you can see all of them at eladgross.live. And we will see you all next